Snow at Heaven's Edge, Chapter 4. The moonlight colored the powdered ground in icy blue and cast dark shadows from the long leafless branches of the dormant trees. The silhouette of several branches, with their slender arms, trembled in a nervous flutter. Inside, the room was quiet, and a small candle, set in the middle of a circular table, flickered to an inaudible tune, causing the surrounding shadows to join the macabre dance. Feng Xiaoyan had closed her eyes, and the sound of sweet slumber emanated from the bed. But she was not asleep. She was doubly envious of her bedmate, whose tender age made sleeping effortless. Possessing a protective guardian was another luxury to an orphaned Xiaoyan. She became a murky pool of emotions: envy, hate, anger, fear. So much so that it exacerbated her insomnia. Memories of places, people, and events all poured forth into the flooded collecting pool within her mind. It was too much. Without release, she felt her mind would explode. She opened her eyes slightly and felt better. The visual distraction kept her from thinking. Xiaoyan turned her head to the side and saw the captivating woman sitting by the table. On it lay a long sword with an ivory white handle and scabbard. The woman's delicate hands rested on the weapon. The woman looked pensive, almost apprehensive. Was she afraid the horde of men would ambush them? Perhaps the mysterious events of the night had captivated her imagination as well. The girl next to Xiaoyan shifted in her sleep and slipped her arms around Xiaoyan's waist. It felt warm and comforting. The wind outside wailed like an army of poor flutists. But Feng Xiaoyan could no longer hear it. She was already sound asleep. The high-pitched sound of a woman laughing woke Lin Ruting. She reflexively tightened her grasp on her sword even before she opened her eyes and squinted against the rays of bright sunlight that surged through the paper panels of the window. She relaxed her grip. Li Xiang and Feng Xiaoyan were still asleep. The latter's face was reminiscent of Zhongwu Yan's. From Ruting's vantage point, she could only see the left, unmarked side of the girl's face. If one judged her from that alone, Feng Xiaoyan would be the classical beauty. Her long lashes curled into a beautiful whorl, while her cheeks were rounded and prominent like small hills that bulged from the smooth ivory whiteness of her skin. The full red lips enhanced her youth and were like ripening cherries that defied the winter. These qualities should have made her exquisitely beautiful. Some would argue that she rivaled the four beauties. As befitted a tragedy, her half-faced beauty only accentuated the pain by continually teasing her with forlorn possibilities. The scarred face was more than just imperfect. It was grotesque and parodied everything that was beautiful on the other half, especially her smile that no one had seen since her 7th year of life. On her right side, the muscles contorted into a horrific mat, causing the corners of her mouth to curve sharply upwards into an awkwardly stretched grin. The cool smoothness of her skin was wrinkled due to the perpetual sneer, and pockets of scar tissues coalesced together, giving it an unsightly unevenness. Had a person seen only this side of her face, he would surely decry her an abomination. Almost as if she knew someone was staring at her, Feng Xiaoyan turned her head, and a few ropes of her hair fell over the edge of the bed. The teenage girl mumbled incoherently in her sleep, as she had throughout the night. Noting nothing unusual, Lin Ruting shifted her attention to the noise outside, which had grown steadily louder. Lai Ye had awoken very early that morning, not out of habit but from insomnia. A mixture of trepidation and nightmarish anger kept him awake all night. Whenever he closed his eyes, an old hatred would seep from an unknown abyss deep within his mind where such dark thoughts dwelled into the arteries and veins and pumped them full of adrenaline. His heart beat 1,000 times faster, sending pulse waves into his eardrums. The pounding was maddening. He knew such was his curse for not being there, even though he knew his presence would not have mattered. At the least, he could have accompanied them in death rather than to live in shame. He breathed into his hands to warm them, and he wondered whether the path his leader, his martial brothers, and his students took was as lonely or as cold as the one he was on now. He thought about the previous night and that devil, Ling Wuai. Lai Ye remembered encountering him following the aftermath of the fight at the inn, when everyone had returned home or retired to their rented rooms. He told Gao Ming to leave him and walked half drunk down the same road, past the wine dealers and down the lone man's path, more fitting of a narrow corridor than a street, where at its end stood his sworn enemy. He reached for his sword, but stopped when he saw that the bastard was not alone. Men dressed as dark as night surrounded Ling Wuai. As a cyclone of snow picked up, the men converged on the lone swordsman, threatening to swallow him. Lai Ye crouched, not in fear but in anticipation. He rested his shaking hand on the hilt of his sword and waited like a hungry wolf, squinting a pair of eyes that reflected nothing but the bitter blackness of his soul. Whatever the outcome, he told himself, I'll deal the final blow. When Ling Wuai drew his sword, the sharp ring resonated like a temple bell and clung to the air despite the howling wind. While the sound hung lazily about, the sword went to work and flew like light itself. The circle of men broke and retreated. Many fell, dropping like blots of ink onto the soft, powdery snow. Lai Ye studied the technique of his foe. His heart sank. The man's sword was much faster and stronger than before. Was it the wind or Ling Wuai's famed blade that screamed into the night? He was not certain. Ling Wuai thrusted, pointed, poked, sliced, slashed, split, but never did he once parry. There was no need. He was the one on the offensive, despite the Black Cloak's numerical advantage. Lai Ye knew this was his chance. He slowly eased his blade out of the scabbard and shifted his weight onto his front leg, readying for a lunge. The 3 remaining Black Cloaks took flight, and Ling Wuai sped after them. Lai Ye crouched once more. His opportunity had vanished. He remained frozen in the alleyway, wide-eyed and trembling. He did not notice the group of masked men that came later to retrieve the dead bodies. His dilated pupils saw nothing except the replay of Ling Wuai's famed twin-gate sword stance. The very cold feeling that overtook him this morning had nothing to do with the sudden gust, blown snow in his direction, but rather the thought of Ling Wuai's sword. He now understood a truth he would prefer to deny. As sure as night follows day, those facing Ling Wuai would perish and destined to walk through the gates of heaven or hell. No, you can't take me, shouted a woman in her early 30s in the frosty courtyard. Wu Niang, we must go, replied the man who was grasping hard onto her wrist. The ruckus had awoken guests in the adjoining rooms. Meng Hua had a few expletives for the couple causing such a ruckus, but when he saw Ling Ruting, he retreated behind a pillar. Ling Ruting caught sight of his large, bulky frame and tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile. She shifted her gaze to the man and the woman. Master Ma, good morning, she said, as she put a fist into her open palm as a symbol of respect. The man had a quizzical expression, and she added, I saw your masterful Xing Shu calligraphy on the wall last night. Ling Ruting has gained much from it. Ma Xiande laughed heartily at the unexpected praise. At one point in his life, he had practiced calligraphy, hoping to achieve merits as a scholar, as well as a warrior. How half a lifetime passed in the blink of an eye. His exuberance was short-lived. Ma Wuliang wrenched herself free and ran behind Ling Ruting. My wife, Wu Niang, Xiande said. Ruting nodded and held the woman's hands. Lady Ma, it's okay. It's okay. She turned to Xiande. Is Lady Ma sick? You have seen her last night. Unfortunately, this is normal, the man sighed. How long has the woman been mad? Shouted Pan Gou, a rather scholarly-looking young fellow. Ma Xiande stared coldly at the oblivious Pan Gou, who smirked and pointed his aquiline nose even higher before quipping. Be careful, you all. A mad woman's bite is worse than a bitch's. And a scholarly scoundrel's bark is more impotent than an old toothless castrated dog's, replied Ling Ruting. Men burst into loud laughter. Nobody expected the delicate lady to counter the man in such fashion. The loudest one was Ma Xiande, who was close to teaching Pan Gou a lesson had it not been Ruting's unabashed retort that diffused his anger. When the laughter finally abated, Ma Xiande said, Miss Lin, Ma Xiande, am very grateful to have met you. My wife and I have many more miles to travel and must depart before it gets dark. As he reached a hand out to take his wife's, Wu Liang whispered, No, please, and looked pleadingly at Lin Ruting. Wu Liang, please, pleaded Ma Xianda. We mustn't dwell. I think this time you should listen to Lady Ma, said a voice that Lin Ruting recognized immediately. Her heart quivered with joy, and her almond-shaped eyes grew larger and brighter, sparkling like pearls as she saw Ling Wuai. Young hero Lin, said Ma Xianda as he palmed a fist in salute. Wuai returned the greeting. Master Ma, I'm afraid the road is not safe for you. It is not safe for the rest of you if we stay, said the older man. Most of the people had begun to lose interest in the conversation as the tension faded and their hope for a fight vanished. But at the mention of something involving their own safety, they stood planted and quiet, waiting to hear what information the young swordsman had to divulge. They all knew that profits were made in times of chaos and trouble. Ling Wuai nodded and placed a hand on the man's shoulder as if to say he understood. Before you go, please, come and have some tea with me. A slight smile appeared in Ma Xianda's face that brightened his gloomy countenance. He looked at his wife, who peeked over Ling Ruting's shoulder like a scared child, and a dark expression clouded his face once more. Master Ma, I will look after Lady Ma. Please feel free to spend as much time as you like with my husband. Ma Xianda nodded and raised a palmed fist to thank the young woman. Shall we? Ling Wuai extended a hand toward an empty corridor. As the two men walked away, the remaining guests stood in silence. What is this secret that Ma Xianda was hiding? How would this implicate them? Did this have anything to do with the strange events from the night before? While they were busy ruminating, Ling Ruting led the paranoid Lady Ma into her room. Chen Daming was out in the storehouse directing his two servants. Ingrates, sons of whores, he cursed under his breath. He squinted his small eyes at the heavens to see the weak sun hide behind a patch of dark clouds. Another storm is coming. He was not sure how much longer the inn could last under these harsh conditions after so many years. He surveyed the rooftop. It surely wasn't the same. The glory days of heroes gathering at Tanya Inn had truly passed. At that time, the air was electric, and tales of heroism came from the men of legends themselves. He was a small child then, and his grandfather was the one running the inn. And now, at every table and in every corner were ruffians after a good fight. Last night was a good example. He sighed. He took a deep breath and sighed again. Feeling a little better, he shouted at Dabing, one of the servants on the rooftop, replacing the broken tiles. Had father shouted this much? He could no longer remember whether he learned to be like this from him or not. A son always takes after his father. Somehow the thought rejuvenated the innkeeper. He straightened his back and shouted. He rarely talks now, once more. Where the hell is Xiang? Sir, he went to get more supplies, replied Ming, the other servant busy splitting firewood in preparation for the night. There's a storm coming. Why don't you get your lazy, no-good carcass up and go find the boy? The both of you better not come back with wet, ruined supplies either, or I'll have both of you whipped. Hearing this, Ming got up and bowed hastily before running off to find Xiang. Chen Daming shook his head vigorously in disbelief. After a moment, he froze and stared at the gray sky. That's it, the innkeeper exclaimed and clapped his hands for no apparent reason, as if struck by some brilliant idea. He too ran off, leaving Dabing alone and dumbstruck. Feng Xiaoyan agreed to stroll the local market with Li Xiang. She was unused to holding a child's hand on these same streets she had walked alone for so long. Despite the awkwardness, she still preferred to be out here than to stay with Ling Ruting and the mad woman. She felt self-conscious next to the beauty and was weary of the disturbed older woman. Besides, she was hungry. The prices innkeeper Chen charged at Tanya Inn were practically robbery. She told Li Xiang of a cheap but extremely good fruit stand that sold more than just kanji. The ginger douhua was the best in Wuchang. You know, Wu Gege loves douhua. We should buy some extra for them, said the girl. I don't care about your Wu Gege and Ruting Jie, Xiaoyan replied, purposely over-exaggerating Li Xiang's tender accent on brother and sister. Li Xiang was in too good of a mood to notice the slight and replied, Well, I do. Snow continued to fall, and food vendors put up awnings around their stalls. Many denizens of Wuchang crowded the streets looking for supplies before the coming storm. Xiaoyan caught fragments of conversations most of which revolved around the mysterious murders of the previous night. People ignored her, and for the first time in a long while, despite her cloaked appearance, Feng Xiaoyan felt normal. "And 2 more for the road, mister," shouted Li Xiang. She took a deep breath and took in the sight and sound of the town. She paid particular attention to the small streets and alleys out of habit. The art of escape was one of Sun Tzu's 36 tactics and high on Li Xiang's hierarchy of useful skills within the pugilistic world of the rivers and lakes. She noticed 2 boys, mere street urchins, no more than 12 and 8 years old, a few tables to the right huddled over a single steamy bowl of congee. The meal was nothing more than pure rice gruel, with only ginger and scallion seasoned on top. "All right, my hand is now warm," said the older of the 2 boys after holding the bowl with his hands. "Here, take it. Don't let the congee get cold." "What about you? Have some first," said the smaller boy, folding up his arms. "I'm not that hungry," the older boy smiled and urged the younger one to eat. "Okay then," the younger boy said. After a single spoonful, he pushed the bowl toward his companion. "Your turn." Li Xiang retrieved a few coins from her breast pocket and called the vendor over to her. He leaned over and the girl spoke softly into his ear, gesturing toward the table with the 2 boys. He nodded and she dropped the coins into his palm. Moments later, he brought 2 bowls full of delicacies for the young boys. "There are a few more meat buns for you to take as well. On the house." "What was that?" Feng Xiaoyan asked. Li Xiang shrugged. "I too was hungry once. Not something I'll ever forget." Xiaoyan opened her mouth, but the words dissipated like hot breath in the winter air when she noticed Li Xiang's eyes tracing a very familiar path across her face. She inhaled to calm her beating heart and quivering hands. "Xiaoyanjie," the girl asked. "Who did that to you?" Hey, you've made it to the end. If you like it so far, please subscribe and like. This lets me know I'm on the right path. And if you can't wait for the next installment of Snow at Heaven's Edge, then head on over to Amazon and read the story in its entirety for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Alternatively, you can check out Dreamweaver and Duo on Mount Taiyuan as well. Both of these stories are done and available for free here on YouTube, Spotify, and Audible. If you want to support me, please consider going to my Ko-fi and being a member. Have a great day.